In the winter of 1922, on a remote farm in Germany, a family began noticing strange things. Footsteps in the attic, a newspaper they didn't recognize, keys that mysteriously went missing. They told no one, not the neighbors, not the police. Then, just days later, all 6 people in the home were brutally murdered with a pickaxe. Their bodies were found stacked in the barn, partially buried in hay. But here's the part that still haunts investigators. Someone stayed in that house after the killings. They fed the animals, cooked meals, slept in the victims' beds, and they were never caught. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck Murders, one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in history. Welcome to Skull Decks, where we dive deep into the darkest corners of real history and true crime. Today's case takes us to the Bavarian countryside, to an isolated farmhouse where an entire family was murdered in cold blood. No one heard screams. No one saw the killer. But someone stayed at the house for days after the crime, eating, feeding the livestock, and even lighting fires in the hearth. It's been over 100 years, and the Hinterkaifeck Murders remain one of Germany's most disturbing unsolved cases. In this video, we'll walk through the chilling events that led up to the massacre, the grisly discovery, the haunting details uncovered during the investigation, and the eerie theories that still keep people up at night. And near the end, we'll talk about a strange twist that made this case even more bizarre. Our story begins in 1922 in a remote part of Bavaria, Germany, a place called Hinterkaifeck. It wasn't even a proper village, just a small, isolated farmstead hidden behind the woods, about 70 kilometers north of Munich. The property was so secluded, even the name Hinterkaifeck literally meant behind Kaifeck, the nearest hamlet. The family living there was the Grubers, Andreas Gruber, the stern and reportedly abusive patriarch, his wife Cecilia, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, Victoria's 2 children, Cecilia Jr. and Joseph, and the family's maid, Maria Baumgartner. Life on the farm was simple, but uneasy. Andreas had a reputation in the nearby village for being harsh and paranoid. There were rumors of incest between him and his daughter Victoria, something that had even landed him in prison briefly. And just days before the murders, strange things started happening. The family reported hearing footsteps in their attic, but when they searched, no one was there. A set of house keys went missing. Footprints were seen in the snow, leading to the house, but not away from it. The most unnerving part: a newspaper appeared on their doorstep, one none of them subscribed to. No one alerted the police. The maid at the time was so frightened by the house that she quit. The family then hired Maria Baumgartner, who arrived for her first day on March 31st, 1922. It would also be her last. By that night, every single person inside that farmhouse would be dead. And what happened next has baffled investigators and chilled locals ever since. On March 31st, 1922, the newly hired maid Maria Baumgartner arrived at Hinterkaifeck. She was replacing the previous maid, who had left claiming the house was haunted. That very night, just hours after Maria arrived, someone brutally murdered everyone in the household. What exactly happened inside that farmhouse is still a mystery, but here's what investigators believe. One by one, members of the family were lured into the barn, possibly by a noise or disturbance outside. First, Andreas and his wife Cecilia, then Victoria, and finally, young Cecilia Jr. Each was struck multiple times in the head with a mattock, a sharp, pickaxe-like farm tool. After killing the 4 in the barn, the killer entered the house and murdered Maria, the maid, in her bed. Then 2-year-old Joseph, Victoria's youngest child, was killed in his crib. Days passed. Neighbors noticed no one from the farm had been seen. The children missed school. The mail began piling up. And yet, people saw smoke rising from the chimney. On April 4th, concerned neighbors finally checked the property. What they found was horrifying. 4 bodies stacked in the barn, half covered in hay. Maria's body in her bed. Joseph, dead in his cart. The most disturbing detail: The killer had stayed. He fed the cows, ate meals in the kitchen, kept the fireplace burning, even milked the cows. Whoever murdered the family had lived in the house for several days, while the bodies decomposed just meters away. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables were missing, and no clear motive. The police were baffled. But as they dug deeper, what they found in the coming days only made the case more terrifying. When police arrived at Hinterkaifeck, what they found made it clear. This wasn't just a brutal murder, it was something far more disturbing. The killer didn't run. He stayed. He fed the livestock, cooked meals, and even slept in the house with the 6 bodies nearby. The killer may have even answered the door to people who came looking. A mechanic who stopped by said no one responded, but smoke was coming from the chimney, proof someone was inside. Investigators discovered the murder weapon, a mattock, a farming tool similar to a pickaxe, hidden in the barn. There were no signs of forced entry, suggesting one of 2 terrifying possibilities. The killer was let in willingly or had been hiding in the house all along. Suspicion quickly turned to Lawrence Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former lover of Victoria. He believed he was the father of her son, Joseph, and the relationship between Victoria and her father, Andreas, had been the subject of scandal for years. Lawrence helped lead the group that discovered the bodies, but his behavior raised eyebrows. He unlocked the house himself, even though no one could explain how he had the keys. He moved through the bloody crime scene without hesitation, and even disturbed the corpses to search for the others. Some say he showed no emotion, as if he already knew what they'd find. He denied everything. Police interrogated him multiple times, but he was never charged. Other suspects included vagrants, disgruntled workers, or even relatives who wanted to inherit the property. But none of these leads ever panned out. The lack of forensic science at the time made it nearly impossible to gather evidence. In desperation, authorities removed the victims' skulls and sent them to Munich for clairvoyants to examine, hoping for supernatural insight. Those skulls later went missing during World War II and were never recovered. The case captivated the public. Newspapers published lurid details. Locals whispered about the strange footprints, the attic noises, and the old maid who fled in fear. But the deeper investigators dug, the more confusing the case became. No motive. No clear suspect. No confession. All that remained were clues and theories. More than a century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in history. And with no killer ever caught, theories have run wild, from the plausible to the paranormal. The most widely accepted theory centers on Lawrence Schlittenbauer. His relationship with Victoria was complicated, and many believed he was the father of her youngest son, Joseph. If Joseph really was Andreas's child, the result of incest, Lawrence may have had motive. Some even believe he committed the murders in a rage, then staged the scene to look like an unknown intruder had done it. His strange behavior at the crime scene added fuel to the fire. He unlocked doors, touched bodies, and walked through pools of blood without hesitation. His explanation: he said he was looking for Joseph. Others weren't so convinced. But Lawrence wasn't the only suspect. Some investigators believed it was a former servant, someone familiar with the farm, the family's habits, and the layout of the house. This would explain how the killer moved around without being noticed and knew exactly where to strike. There's also the theory of a random drifter or vagrant, especially given the economic hardships after World War I. But that doesn't explain the deliberate cruelty of the crime, or why the killer stayed for days afterward, living among the corpses. Then there's the most chilling theory of all, that the killer had been hiding inside the house for days or even weeks before the murders. Some believe they were living in the attic, coming down at night to steal food or observe the family. The missing keys, strange newspaper, and footsteps above support this idea. That theory becomes even more disturbing when you remember the family suspected something, but chose not to tell anyone. And finally, there are those who believe the house itself was cursed, that something unseen had taken hold of it. Locals long believed the land was unholy, and the surviving townspeople demolished the farmhouse not long after. All that's left today is a memorial, a cold stone cross standing in the middle of nowhere, where a family was murdered, and no one ever paid the price. The Hinterkaifeck murders are terrifying not just because of their brutality, but because of the silence that followed. No justice, no closure. Just 6 people gone, and a farmhouse that quietly rotted into the earth. Even today, the land where Hinterkaifeck once stood is empty. No one ever rebuilt. The house was demolished in 1923, just a year after the murders. Locals said they wanted to forget, but some say it was something else, fear. Visitors to the site have reported strange noises, feelings of being watched, and even the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, even though there are no floors left. And here's one final detail, the most unsettling of all. In 2007, over 80 years later, German police reopened the case as a training exercise. Using modern techniques, they came up with a suspect they believed was almost certainly the killer. But out of respect for the suspect's surviving family, they never released the name. Which means someone may have gotten away with mass murder. And they might have died an old, free person, never once answering for the horror they left behind. What do you think really happened at Hinterkaifeck? Was it a crime of passion, a calculated act of revenge, or something far more sinister hiding in the shadows? Let me know your theory in the comments. I read everyone. If you found this story chilling, hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into real crime, horror, and dark history. I post new cases every week, each one more twisted than the last. Until then, lock your doors, trust your instincts, and never ignore the sound of footsteps in the attic.